Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Pod Save the Youth. I'm your host, David Seaton, and today we have two fantastic guests with us to talk all about the current political situation in Canada in the wake of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's announcement of his resignation as party leader and Prime Minister last week. Matt and Leo, would you like to give some brief introductions? We can start with you, Matt.
Yeah. I have worked on Canadian campaigns on elections within the Democratic Party for several years, going back to 2015, and I'm now a resident and doing similar work in Massachusetts.
And Leo.
Thanks, David. Great to be here. My name's Leo. I'm a civics instructor with Civics Unplugged, helping young people, I guess, in America and around the world become more civically minded and get out to vote. I'm a former public servant with the Canadian federal government with Global Affairs and the Canada Border Services Agency.
All right. Well, it's great to have both of you here today to talk about the current situation in Canada. As you know, on Tuesday, January 2nd, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced his resignation, ending his nearly decade of leadership in the Canadian government. Over his time in office, Trudeau pursued a number of progressive causes, including climate action and refugee resettlement. Trudeau also gained international popularity by juxtaposing his socially progressive leadership ideals to Donald Trump during his time in office, primarily on the topic of immigration. But in Canada, he lost considerable support over the last few years due to a number of high-profile scandals around taking an expensive vacation on a private island as a personal gift, wearing blackface in the past, and unpopular policies like the carbon tax, COVID restrictions, and allowing millions of immigrants into the country to fill jobs in the post-pandemic labor shortage. This collectively led to Justin Trudeau becoming widely unpopular among Canadians, with Liberals ending 2024 with a popularity deficit to the Conservatives of nearly 25 percentage points. And after his deputy prime minister, Chrystia Freeland, made the decision to step down, Trudeau ultimately came to the decision to do the same last week. So both Matt and Leo, what do you think of Trudeau's announcement to step down, and do you think it came at the right time?
I think it came at the time that it had to come for Trudeau. The writing was on the wall ever since, certainly since Freeland's break from cabinet around Christmas time there, and after that, I think it was just a matter of uh, how long the rope was for Trudeau.
I think I would tend to agree with Matt. And it seems like in caucus since around midway through the summer, calls have been sort of internally been brewing from mostly MPs who weren't going to run again to call for his resignation. The way and the time that he chose, if you recall, Minister Freeland's resignation in relation to the fall economic statement was nothing short of disastrous, and then the way that he made the decision to prorogue Parliament is sort of it has sort of come far too late. And I think you'll get to this, but in the context of what President-elect Trump is threatening Canada with, it seems like it was potentially one of the worst timings in recent memory for sort of an exit but not exit as he promised.
So now the Liberal Party will begin the process of selecting a new party leader who will be tasked with serving the remainder of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's term as Prime Minister after his resignation goes into effect in the coming months. So far, the top contender for Trudeau's replacement seems to be Minister Freeland. What are your thoughts, both of you, on Minister Freeland's time in government, her experience, and what do you think she'll bring to the table as Prime Minister if selected?
I mean, I think she's certainly the strongest candidate when it comes to the question of taking on Donald Trump, which I think is going to be one of the foremost. It will be the question of this election. I know the conservatives keep calling this a carbon tax election, and in a lot of other scenarios, that would be what folks would be voting on. But with the emergence of this kind of wild environment of having the U.S. antagonize Canada the way that the incoming president has done, that will be the ballot question. Freeland's got experience negotiating with Trump during the last round of the NAFTA renegotiations that happened, and it's no secret that she got under Donald Trump's skin as a strong woman leading Canada's negotiations. She also has a lot of experience on foreign policy and specifically as it relates to Ukraine. She, I believe, speaks Ukrainian along with several other languages. Spent time there, I think, around the time that the Soviet Union fell. She's got family connections, and I imagine that that would be a plus for her in that campaign as well.
I think it's important to know, David. Chrystia Freeland's a record minister of everything, almost, just like how Dominic LeBlanc is now. It has always been sort of a true one of Trudeau's closest allies in terms of, you see the portfolio she's held, and it's nearly unparalleled in terms of breadth and seriousness for sure. It would be important to note the distinction between the election from Liberal Party members and the election that is yet to come, likely in the spring for all Canadians. So, it's as we speak today, House Leader Karina Gould threw her hat in the ring, and sort of, Mark Carney has always been on the table, but you see, Francois-Philippe Champagne and Melanie Joly sort of, stepping away. So, to say that Chrystia Freeland is the presumptive choice is sort of, I would say, relatively early, although likely. But it would be interesting to think about what kind of legacy Deputy Prime Minister Freeland would want to leave, given how short of a time she'll govern if elected, and how that sort of taints her legacy as she becomes, or she'll fight for official opposition, right, in a very short amount of time. That's the way the polls seem to go.
A big question too, in terms of the leadership selection here, is if if the Liberals are picking their leader for just this upcoming election or the one after that as well. There's not a lot of great history in terms of being someone who takes the reins from a failing government that's failing in the polls right before election day. The long-lasting prime ministerships of John Turner and Kim Campbell are great examples of that. And so you'd think that for anyone running, they maybe see the writing on the wall and know that it's a long shot to win this year's election. Never say never, anything's possible. But they'll have their eye on making their case for why they shouldn't be turfed immediately after. Sometimes you lose an election and your party will show you the door pretty quickly. It shouldn't be too hard to make that argument so long as you don't tank the party even further. But you'll still need to make that case because after the election, there'll be people who will be gunning for that job and calling for change at the top, even though it's nearly an impossible task to begin with.
So as you mentioned, Leo, the Liberals in government will be forced to call an election by next October, likely to happen in the spring, as you said. Currently, the Conservatives are poised for a large electoral victory across Canada, making it likely that the next nationally elected Prime Minister will be Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre. Over the course of his time in the political scene, Poilievre has expressed strongly right-wing views on immigration, climate policy, and parental choice in education. Poilievre has also strongly criticized the NDP and worked to tie the party to the Prime Ministership of Justin Trudeau and his leadership over his time in office. So Matt, you worked with the NDP pretty closely in the past. What do you think the party should do to draw a clear separation between their agenda and the Liberals right now?
Yeah, I mean, you need to point out the ways that the Liberals have dropped the ball. There's no denying that there are openings there and there are messages that resonate. Frankly, even Canadians who are largely pro-immigrant have some questions about some of the increases that happened in the last couple of years that even the Liberal Party has acknowledged and said that they are making changes to address, because there really was a considerable spike after the COVID years. Um, it's funny. I don't think they actually need to distance themselves from too many things, because they have spent the last 4 years championing that their demands in this minority government have, whether it's the dental care program that has made dental care accessible to many Canadians who didn't have it before. The pharmacare program that is only now, I think, starting to roll out, and it's rolling out with universal access to contraception and diabetes medication. The $10 a day childcare that the Liberals have brought in. These are all NDP policies, and as has been done in history, when there's a Liberal minority government, the NDP knows that they can get things like that. That's how Canada got universal health care to begin with. These are popular programs that help people, and the NDP would be wise, I think, to reiterate that, and still acknowledge that Justin Trudeau's leadership is what needs to change, and that they are the party best poised to take on the Conservatives, given that they don't have all this internal turmoil going on around their leadership right before the election.
Yeah, is there any appetite right now between the Liberals and the NDP to work together in this moment to prevent a even larger than necessary Conservative majority?
It's a loaded question in Canada. I think the anything but conservative movement is something that has started ever since the right wing parties united to be one. There used to be the Progressive Conservatives and the Reform, also known as the Canadian Alliance. And once they became one party in the early 2000s, and especially under the Harper years in power from 2006 to 2015. In that 2015 election, especially, the mantra is vote anything but conservative. If you're in a riding where there's the Liberals look like they're the competitive party in second place, maybe that could be the Conservative, vote for them. If you're riding with the NDP, where they have the better chance, vote for them. If you're in one of the couple of green ridings, vote for them. The problem is getting that message to voters is extremely difficult. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of second guessing. If you're in a three-way riding, especially back in 2015, sorry, I should say 2013, when Trudeau won the Liberal Party leadership, this was actually a very important question. The Liberals were in third place, which is a rarity. Anytime that the NDP it was the only time that NDP's ever been official opposition, and the Liberals were worried about their party disappearing. Trudeau's most competitive opponent in that leadership race was a woman, Liberal MP by the name of Joyce Murray. She ran explicitly on a platform for the NDP and Liberals to cooperate formally, to actually pull candidates so they weren't running against each other. And she was thoroughly defeated. And the outcome of that was that the Liberals actually returned with a pretty strong mandate in the 2015 election. So you would think that there's a lot of incentives for the parties to do this, but they also don't want to get. It feels like giving up when you do something like that, and I think that's going to be a pretty major impediment to any formal cooperation between the parties.
Yeah, Leo, any thoughts on this too?
Yeah, it's important to distinguish the difference between working together as is common in a lot of European states, for a minority government, and it would be risky, if not impermissible at this point, to do some of the same narratives in an election cycle. After what the leader of the federal NDP party has done to the Liberals in the past 2 months, I'm unsure whether it's possible at all. And in fact, in many ridings in British Columbia, there is a lot of merit and probably a lot of gains to be had for them not to work together, right? So if you were to look at current polling, almost half of British Columbia is too close to call, and that too close to call is not between a Liberal and NDP, right? So, but rather for, the alternative. So if you were to think about the future for, because you ask about even larger conservative majority, we'll see how large and whether even marginally that would make even a big difference.
And I guess just a question about Pierre Poilievre here. What are you expecting if the likeliest scenario does happen and Pierre Poilievre becomes the next nationally elected Prime Minister of Canada? What major policy changes are you expecting to happen first?
I mean, if we take his campaign slogan, up front, it's going to be getting rid of the carbon tax, axe the tax. His slogans are really easy to follow, and what the policies that come out of that could be, might be more detailed, but he's talked about getting more homes built, so that's probably going to be trying to slash um, red tape where they can. A lot of that's not necessarily federal, a federal issue, but there are ways that the federal government could try to spur on more housing development. Um, I would expect some of the social right wing policies. When you opened up and kind of gave his background, you missed on some of even the kind of the more insidious stuff that is in his background. When he was just an MP under the Harper government, said he was quoted saying that he believes that Indigenous people needed to learn hard work more than they needed to get compensated for the ghastly residential school violence that many of them face. Residential schools that forced Indigenous kids into these state-run, well, religious-run, state-sanctioned schools where they couldn't speak their language, they couldn't contact their family, they were essentially their culture was erased from them. His leadership campaign, when they were putting videos out, used the tag "men going their own way" on the videos, and there were hidden tags in the YouTube videos. This is a tag that the incel community, who have some very questionable views about women, and women's bodily autonomy amongst other rights, and during Harper's government, he was also the architect of the so-called Fair Elections Act, which really sought to bring in a lot of restrictions on voting, voter suppression, somewhat similar to what some states in the U.S. experience. And I don't think that those things are necessarily going away, especially if he's going to be swept to a huge popular majority. And a lot of it's also going to rest on how much heat he ends up facing from Donald Trump. He gets brought into Trump world, and Donald Trump is excited to have a fellow right wing head of state north of the border. Then I think you'll see Prime Minister Poilievre lean into that. If the negotiations go south, that's going to affect how Poilievre could be viewed in Canada, and he's probably going to want to stand up against Trump, and that will probably mean having to lose some of that right wing messaging as well. So a lot of it is going to be dependent on how Donald Trump behaves.
Yeah, so Pierre went on an interview recently with CBC where he recounted his 460 events over the course of the past year across the country, and the number of times he said, "Axe the tax, build the homes, curb the or stop the crime, and bring home bigger, stronger, more powerful paychecks" is probably in the thousands at this point. And it's important to note that this vague mandate is in his interest, and this anti-Trudeauism that he's run for so long, and the lack thereof of an elaboration of his concrete policies is dragging on too far. But at the same time, it's in his interest to hold out from any controversy until he wins, as you alluded to, probably one of the biggest majorities in the past decade. So to that end, it's important to recognize how much more of a big tent conservative he's become to become leader, and it's important to remark his history and track record for sure. But you know, ultimately, when it comes time for him to elaborate some of these policies, it would be like these trade relations and renewal of CUSMA in light of the tariffs would be a key thing to note, and as well his cabinet ministers, especially you know the likes of you know your Andrew Scheers, your his two deputy leaders at this point would be driving some of those conversations. So. It's the vagueness is good for him, but perhaps not good for ultimately what will manifest. Probably in the spring.
Yeah, and as you touched on, both of you, let's talk a little bit about U.S.-Canada relations going forward under the future Trump administration. Regardless of the current political turmoil in Canada that is unfolding as we speak, relations between the US and Canada are likely to greatly devolve in the coming months, with President-elect Donald Trump taking office, seemingly poised to attempt to implement harsh tariffs on Canada and Canadian imports for America's largest trading partner. Trump has also repeatedly joked about making Canada the 51st US state, a stance that is widely unpopular in Canada and viewed as offensive to many Canadians. So how do we expect that US-Canada relations will evolve going forward into the coming months as President-elect Trump takes power?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, it started off as a joke that we all were laughing at, even Canadians, maybe at first when it was just kind of leaked that Trump had said this thing about the 51st state while Trudeau was in Mar-a-Lago having that initial meeting with the president-elect early December or something. It's a very Trump-sounding kind of joke that we would expect, and Canadians have a sense of humor. We can laugh about something like that. It's come out now too that Trudeau maybe put back that there would be a trade for Vermont or California. So what originally though I think might have seemed like fun and games became quite serious as Donald Trump continued going to this theme in the ensuing weeks, and then at the press conference just a couple of weeks ago talked about economically conquering Canada, and in the same press conference was talking about actually physically invading Greenland and Panama. This is also someone who's talked about using the U.S. military to strike Mexico. Um, when these comments start coming along instead of just a joke at a private table, but are in a press conference and accompanied by even more serious threats to other allied nations, that they start becoming very serious. And I think to me, the thing that really exemplified this was that beyond just the anti-Trump folks being upset and concerned, we've started to see Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who has been known as being like Canada's kind of Trumpy politician. Rob Ford is much more famous when he was mayor of Toronto, but Doug Ford has some kind of unconventional antics and style as well. And even more to the point, just a few days ago, Stephen Harper, the former Conservative Prime Minister, who in the more recently has been head of the International Democratic Union, which is this international grouping of conservative parties from around the world. Stephen Harper has started sounding the alarm about how these are no longer jokes, but should be interpreted as semi-serious threats that Canadian lawmakers need to start taking seriously.
So the approach that our federal leaders have currently taken comes with the assumption that there's a relatively stable core of career public servants and advisors in Trump's circle that would at least be reflective, if not seriously logical in terms of the this precarious, well, now precarious relationship, and would sort of listen to common sense and continue the legacy of what Canada US has been for a long period of time. It's this abject disregard for things like trade imbalances and conflating them with subsidies and moving to saying things like economic force and etc. That starts to undermine this sort of like this diplomatic exchange, but also you start to see some of this person-to-person exchange even fall through as well. So you see our premier of Ontario start to appear on MSNBC, CNN, ABC, and then you saw the premier of Alberta show up in Mar-a-Lago not too long ago, right? And it seems like this person-to-person relationship with Trump and his team, what could have maybe been convincing means in his first administration, now has become largely futile. So as of literally this, like the second week of November, Canadians leaders have essentially at all levels have accepted the fact that the tariffs are coming. And in many ways, this starting to signal that America is no longer a reliable ally. Now economically or also militarily, that remains to be seen. But it's a signal because of how concerning this is in light of him appointing a relatively experienced sage U.S. ambassador to Canada. So it seems like little else matters other than his will to be to sort of blow up this bilateral relationship.
I just want to add to you. I mean, I think it's really interesting that you mentioned both Doug Ford's approach to trying to quell this, as well as Danielle Smith's in Alberta. And it's interesting. Doug Ford's always kind of been known or thought to be our more wacky conservative premier. Like I said, a lot of people may have drawn Trump comparisons in the past, whereas Danielle Smith is actually the like professional politician. But their approaches have been very different. I would characterize Doug Ford's approach as being the united Team Canada, serious politician. He's talked about retaliation in the form of cutting off some of the power that essentially powers New York. um, and instead, it's been Danielle Smith, who seems like she maybe has been on board the crazy train a little bit more, traveling down to Mar-a-Lago, not to have just a serious sit-down conversation, but I think to just kind of be in the court with the gestures and some of the mania that I'm sure is going on there, and has also taken up the invitation to attend the inauguration. I believe she's the only Canadian official, at least that I've heard of, who has had that invitation or is taking it up. And it has drawn some to question whether she's actually doing this in terms of being there to advance Canada's interest against these tariffs and against anything else that Trump has been plotting against Canada, or if she's just there to get in on the ride.
Do we think, for our last question, that the Poilievre government in Canada, if elected, will want to strengthen ties with Trump over their shared conservative values, or do you think that they're going to take a more confrontational approach to each other?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to say without knowing how Trump's going to react to Poilievre's election. You know, optimistically, I would say that it'll smooth a lot of this over, and maybe some of the tariffs come down. But Leo, you talked about the stable core of advisors in Trump's circle, and I think whether it's on foreign policy or a lot of other issues, it's hard to have a strong faith that that core is going to keep him on a track that is predictable and beneficial to both countries and this alliance that they have. If I had to bet, though, I would say that it does not bring the crazy down, and that we're going to continue to have all kinds of wild negotiations throughout our coming election, but even after, regardless of who wins.
David, if you were to look at what the Solicitor General in Ontario has been up to recently, it's nothing but plans to strengthen what we now call Fortress AmCan or Can-Am, depending on what side you're on, in terms of a public safety, border control, immigration mitigation sort of approach to what is essentially appeasement at what Americans probably would a gubernatorial or a provincial level. And this sort of like heroes that have emerged in light of such a chaotic situation is you look at this type of appeasement, whether it aligns with what Doug Ford has promised to do a lot of the time, and perhaps there are benefits to both sides when you're trying to find common ground there, and maybe use some of this momentum to get things done because they ought to be done. At the end of the day, this will have a devastating effect on, if applied, just the tariffs. But this is truly only the beginning. So current projections say with a 25% tariff, as Trump promised, it's about a 0.8% contraction for Canada's GDP within the year. And that's conservatively. But at the same time, it's important to note that if you were to take out crude oil from the net imbalance, the trade imbalance that Trump keeps alluding to, you're pretty much even. So the trade imbalance is caused by the importation of a raw material that directly or indirectly contributes to anywhere between 300 to 500,000 American jobs at minimum, right? So if none of these points have sort of landed, then it's perhaps worrying to think about, Polyev, despite value similarities or perhaps a style and approach, is less of a many colorful things that Trump has called Trudeau. It's sort of challenging to be optimistic because so little of perhaps the values and sort of the agenda matters, and is perhaps not as convincing as we hope.
That's it for Pod Save the Youth this week. Tune in next week for our next episode. See you all next time.